Orcas Island, Camp Indralaya, the first in a series of talks on meditation and a spiritual life. 8 September 1979, morning.
Om Sahanavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Ma Vidvishamahe Tejasvinavadhitamastu Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. It is usual to recite a peace chant before the commencement of any serious study. There are at least a dozen chants, each fitted for a particular occasion, and the one you have just heard invokes the Eternal through its word, which is Om. Om is the first word, the syllable that catches in human language the first creative vibration that initiated this universe. So in repeating Om, we invoke that precious moment of creativity. It is, so to say, the press button which brings into our atmosphere the Eternal, Brahman. And the chant begins, may He protect us both, He who teaches and them who learn. May He enjoy our labors. Let it not be confined to us alone. Let the Supreme Enjoyer be present, participate, and enjoy our labors. And may we never hate. Where there is hatred, there the divine presence cannot come or stay. And may our study be luminous. Let it not be dull, let it not be lethargic, but luminous, bright, dynamic. And there is the chant of peace. Peace for the mind, peace for the life energies, and peace for the physical. Man is a triple being. He has a mind that thinks, a life energy that sustains him, and a body in which he is founded. And the peace must be there on all the three levels. I am sure I am voicing the deepest feelings and sentiments of you all when I say how grateful we are that there is this Indralaya, the home of Indra. In saying how grateful we are to this institution, I record the gratitude to all the dedicated labors that have gone into its making for over half a century. A home of divine wisdom. For what is Indra? Whatever Indra is in popular mythology, the significance of Indra is different. All the world over, popular mythologies are an interesting cover, a veil of more profound truths which are kept concealed from the profane eye. But to keep up the interest, they are put in form of stories, of legends, highly colored with physical imagination. In popular mythology, Indra is the god, the monarch of all gods. He is the ruler of the three worlds, the physical, the vital, and the mental. But in the ancient symbolism of the Vedic mystics, who first speak of Indra, Indra is the god of the divine mind. The human mind is a very limited affair. It doesn't have knowledge. It can only be an instrument for knowledge. Properly utilized, properly handled, it can be a means to approach knowledge. At its best, it can reflect knowledge. It cannot give knowledge. Above this mind, limited, error-prone, there are levels of a divine intelligence where knowledge is spontaneous, where knowledge is unerring. And Indra signifies a divine mind where that truth of unity, truth of oneness, and the truth of multiplicity, manifold nature, are both held together in one vision, one grasp. And that is where all human knowledge is synthesized in its right spirit. And in this spiritual myth, Indra is not only there on these heights of terrestrial existence, but he wields a weapon called the thunderbolt. The thunderbolt is called Vajra, diamond, and a white diamond. A diamond signifies an irresistible, unbreakable power, and white signifies purity, utter purity. And with this weapon, he descends into the nether worlds, the worlds of our subconscious, the worlds of our inconscience, where, as Sri Aurobindo describes in his epic Savitri, the golden shackles of the eternal lie. They are concealed from man, lest men may have them and be even as gods. These powers, latent powers, potent powers, are lying concealed and embedded in regions of our being to which we have no access. They are covered by the evil one, whom no God, no power is able to overpower. But it is Indra, the god of the divine mind, who wields his thunderbolt, breaks him into pieces, and at once Vritra, the one who prevents, he is done away with. The waters, the rivers from the underground, they flow upward. The physical rivers flow downward. But these rivers of consciousness flow upward and release man from slavery to ignorance, incapacity, and eventually death. Now that Indra, he is the presiding deity, presiding presence over this beautiful home of knowledge, of wisdom, of a liberating knowledge. And whatever we study during the 2 days that we have before us should be in the spirit of cultivating this knowledge, of understanding something of this infinite wisdom. And that brings us to the theme of meditation. Meditation is a word which signifies different things to different people, and meditation is not all of one kind. There are meditations and meditations. Meditations which yield unspeakable joy, meditations which bring in peace, meditations which open the doors to illuminations of knowledge, of experience, meditations which put you in touch with the cosmos around. But the common feature of all types of meditation is attunement. You attune your consciousness, your awareness to something which you want to know or realize. If you want to know solution to a problem, you set aside everything else and your central awareness, central consciousness, you tune to that, and gradually you begin to know. Similarly, peace, silence, whatever we want to achieve, our consciousness is tuned to that. This attunement to something with which we are not normally in touch may be called meditation. But it is understood that such a type of meditation cannot be done all of a sudden. It cannot be that all the 23 hours of my day I live a hectic life, involved in everything that comes, tossed like a football by every circumstance, and At the appointed hour, I sit in my prayer room, a room of silence or meditation. It will not work. Meditation is a process, an exercise that calls for a certain background. It is only when the right background has been cultivated that you can just sail into meditation, move into the poise of meditation. And this background, what I may call a preliminary training, self-training, is a must, particularly in meditations of a spiritual type. There was a master of yoga, the yogic tradition in India, say about 3000 years ago, Patanjali by name. Many scholars describe him as the founder of yoga, but it is not that. When he came on the scene, sometime in history, there were a number of floating traditions, different types of yoga, different types of meditation as part of yoga. And he took upon himself, he was moved to collect all the traditions and codify, systematize that old ancient knowledge which tended to recede into the limbo of history. And he formulated them in about 130 or 40 aphorisms. Now these aphorisms in India are an institution by themselves. They are called sutras. And the art of composing a sutra is the maximum of knowledge, the maximum number of concepts in the minimum number of words. And it is said that when the poet or the writer, the creator of these aphorisms, he can shorten it by one syllable, he has the joy of as if a son is born to him. They are that exact. And he has recorded the whole science of yoga in about 150 cryptic lines. It was all very well at that time to do that, but for an age more 3000 years from him, having a different mentality, different conceptual organized schemes, it's very difficult to know what exactly he meant. And so we have commentaries, sub-commentaries, glosses, each one claiming to have discovered the real sense, controverting what others have said, a needless exercise. For after all, a living truth has many dimensions. Each understands in the way in which he is ready to understand. So one has to understand and not judge. One has to give freedom to everyone to understand in his way or her way and express the reactions. Now this teacher, Patanjali, he says nobody should ever step into the land of yoga, meditation, unless he equips himself with a preliminary, an external yoga, which consists of 5 inhibitions, don'ts, and 5 injunctions, do's. And in the Indian culture, these 10 rules of life, codes of conduct, are interwoven with every system of culture. How far we practice those things is another matter. But everyone knows, and everyone knows when he goes contrary to it that he is doing something wrong and he tries to cover it up. But a spiritual seeker can't cover up things because he is in the presence of someone or something which regards everything. Even though he may close his eyes to it, there is an intelligence, there is a presence which is always there. And one has to be sincere. I assume that all of us who have taken all the trouble, all the pains to come and assemble here are sincere in our quest, our seeking. And we will understand things a little better than common men in the street when I say that the first requirement is non-injury. It is called in Sanskrit ahimsa. Now this gospel of non-injury, non-violence has been understood very much in the physical sense, that we don't injure things. But that is only the first interpretation, the first understanding. In India we have certain sects of religion called the Jains who have exaggerated this doctrine so much that they will not take food after the sunset in the evening, because they are afraid when eating food they may swallow some insects, small microbes, nor will they walk on the streets at night lest they tread upon some living creatures. Some of them who are like monks, they always cover their lips with mouths with a band of cloth, so that when they breathe or talk, they don't harm any certain creatures. These are exaggerations. Every truth that the divine releases into the universe gets exaggerated, covered with unwarranted assumptions, and this is one such. What is expected of us is not so much adherence to the principle of physical non-violence. There is a lot to it to see to that. It is a mental and a psychological harmlessness. What we think, what we feel, what we imagine. Now those vibrations, if they are of anger, hostility, vengeance, vindictiveness, they go out into the universe and cause a good deal of harm. But more than the harm to others, it is harm to ourselves. They vitiate our own system. They create grooves, dark grooves in our system, by which in future every movement of thought, every movement of feeling tends to move into that groove. And to desist from violence physically, but inwardly to harbor feelings of enmity, feelings of violence, that something wrong should happen to this is not right. What is called righteous anger, it is a contradiction in terms. There can be no righteous anger. anger is wrong under whatever conditions. Righteous indignation, righteous anger, it is a way to justify ourselves. These are very primitive signs which are best eschewed by man as he develops. By the way, when I speak of man, or anybody speaks of man in the philosophical, spiritual or psychological context, it does not mean male. It means the human being, a human person. I was taken to task in one or two places when I came to this country. Why do you exclude women? Do you mean to say that all this applies only to? Then I said, no. Man includes women. Man does not mean male. It is a human species. Then I have been trying to be very careful in using the word person or individual, but at times I slip into my old habit, and so you will kindly understand. Now, I was saying that this inner violence, psychological hardness, that is most unspiritual and causes greater harm to other persons than physical harm. Sri Aurobindo says in his commentary on the Gita, how? Soul violence, coercing others, not physically, but through a moral pressure, that releases greater forces of violence in the cosmic balance than physical violence. We think we are not harming. I am punishing myself. But in that very act there is a kind of punishment. A force, suicide, is also another kind of violence. Suicides are more in the nature of reactions, frustrations, wanting to punish somebody who is responsible for one's frustrations, who is thought to be responsible for one's frustrations. Now these are subtler forms of violence, subtler forms of injury. Injury to one's own soul. Suicide is an act of infliction of violence on one's own soul. And I may mention incidentally that it is an absurd solution. Suicide does not solve any problem. From the occult point of view, I commit suicide because of certain circumstances which I can't handle, and I feel it is the best to avoid the whole situation. Well, I die. At the moment of death, something realizes that it should not be done, and there is a great struggle to come back to life. It is not possible. After death, one finds oneself in the subtle physical world, surrounded by all kinds of entities. Not all very healthy. And one tries to rush back into one's body, and the body is not there. A moment of great pain. And after completing the post-mortem cycle, when one comes back, one has to start at the very point from where he left. So suicide doesn't solve anything. It only prolongs the distress and the agony of the soul. So to come back to the point, we have to desist from violence in our thought, feeling, in any kind of subjective life. Objectively, we are cultured enough not to inflict violence on others. That's the first condition. And the true test that one has mastered this tendency or the impulse to violence, one has truly cultivated non-violence, spirit of non-injury, is that in the presence of such a person, traditional enemies forget their enmity. We have number of instances in our country where in the hermitages of saints and sages, those who have devoted themselves to the higher pursuit, traditional inimical creatures like the snake and the mongoose, a tiger cub and the deer, they lie in the same place, relaxed, forgetting that they are enemies. And this is the truth, not imagination, not poetry. We can still see this fact that when you have eliminated violence from your system, from your body, from your mind, people who are normally violent, they are subdued. They feel different. And to keep the inner peace, it is very necessary that this non-injury should be cultivated. The second step is conservation of sex energy. The Sanskrit term with which many of you are no doubt familiar, brahmacharya, has been wrongly translated in English by many as celibacy. But it does not mean that in its original sense. Brahman is God, the divine, and charya is the way of life. So a way of life leading to God, that is brahmacharya. And it lies in conservation of sex energy. This is not a superstition, not a religious dogma, but there is a science, a rational justification, explanation why it is so much cherished and given importance in the spiritual context. And that is, in the human body, whether it is male or female, it is immaterial. There are number of sex fluids representing physical formations of a coursing life energy. It takes different forms at different levels. Imagine that these fluids are like water. As the body grows, they also gather. And nature has a way of forcing these waters to flow out for purposes of her own, perpetuate the species. Nature puts a pressure and creates conditions in which the human body inclines to throw it out. Now, if by discipline, by self-control, one can hold this for a while, these waters, they gather, and there is a heat. There is a warmth in the body, a heat, which is called tapas. This heat warms up the whole system and gives a glow. The will becomes very strong. The will to effectuate what one wants increases tremendously. And every capacity in the body is ignited. If you go further, conserve still more, that heat turns into light. Tapas turns into tejas. So that the brain gets illumined, the memory gets sharpened, and we have feats and feats of memory, where people can remember thousands and thousands of lines. Read once and they will tell you for the rest of the time what was there on the left side or right side. That capacity to grasp and hold, always in readiness, the memory power increases. And if one perseveres, both the inner heat and the inner light convert themselves into an inner electricity called Vidyut. When there is this inner electricity flowing through the veins, a person has untold willpower and a remarkable illumination of the knowledge faculties. Preserved still further, and this electricity Vidyut converts itself into what is called Ojas. Ojas means that primal power, creative power of ether. Long before this material creation came into being, there was ether, and there was a creative power in ether which has brought out all these material formulations. So this power of primal power, creative power of ether, one can create. Some compare this creative power to the creative power of God. And next, if one can still conserve, it turns into what is called virya, that is spiritual power, spiritual potency, which leads one directly to self-realization, realization of the self. That is why they recommend, encourage conservation of sex energy. It is not a fad, but it is an inner discipline which one does for the joy of it. A person who really practices this discipline does not feel that he is denying himself something, that he is missing something. The joy of conservation is 100 times more intense than the joy of dissipation. Western psychoanalysts, they are always loud in their condemnation of this Eastern approach to sex in asking for conservation of sex energy. They said people go mad. But there is not one case in the history of the universe where a person has become mad only because he has not had sex. Things happen because when there is an outer rejection, outer, desisting, but an inner indulgence. What the Gita calls hypocrisy. There are many who by circumstance or for sake of form, as in nunneries, monasteries, ashrams, they desist from the outer act, but mentally they indulge. It is called mental indulgence, and naturally this creates an imbalance, this creates a disequilibrium, and persons do get imbalance. But they are themselves responsible. Because they are not sincere, there is a duality, and this cheating of oneself, insincerity, that's the cause of these imbalances, and not a practice which encourages conservation of sex energy. Naturally, this means different things to different people at different stages of life, different stations in life. A person who is a householder, a family man, a married man, his requirement in this context will be different than of one who is a student, who is still preparing for life. And it is also true that as spiritual meditational experience exercises continue, the lure of sex, the hold of sex drops by itself. One doesn't have to make an effort. It just drops like a dry fruit from a tree. One is no longer interested. It all depends upon one's evolutionary development, the intensity of seeking for a higher truth. It is not that sex is low or condemned or unspiritual. Sex is a legitimate part of life, but it is only one interest in life, not everything. When a higher interest replaces it, one naturally loses attraction for it. But for that, one has to know what it is all about. And in the science of yoga, there is this rational explanation explaining why these energies are to be preserved, conserved, and not dissipated. It is also a fact to be remembered that indiscriminate sex leads to a psychological confusion, throws one open to 1,000 forces from all directions, and it is impossible in that vortex to gather oneself and meditate or practice any kind of inner discipline for the higher consciousness. Having said that, we can move to the third requirement, but I think it is 45 minutes, and I would like to stop here and invite questions, not only on things that we have mentioned, but any related themes or topics.
When you were speaking of the violence, psychological violence, to the person who is receiving it, is he still not responsible for his own feelings? Would that person necessarily have to go react to these?
A person who is at the receiving end, if somebody does something wrong to me, whether I will be justified in reacting to it mentally, is that the question?
Or not?
Well,
What's his responsibility?
not to react, because by reacting to somebody's anger, to somebody's injustice, we place ourselves at the same level of karma. We participate, and thereafter it is a clash between him and me. But if I don't react, there is a universal justice, a universal karma that takes charge of the situation, and I keep aloof. So he has to pay for it quicker. Of course, to do it because he should pay for it is a wrong approach. But the fact is that I would put it, he will realize quicker. If I don't react, he will realize his wrong thing quicker than if I reacted. So it is a sign of strength, sign of higher consciousness not to react, not to get caught in the movement of a force of disharmony. But it does not mean that one has to yield. One can be firm about not yielding, but not to react.
Does that also apply to nations?
Nations,
Progressive nations? So on.
the collective consciousness has not yet developed to that level where this can be a law. It will be insincere to apply this law at a level where it cannot operate. We human beings have developed to a certain extent that we can ask you, don't react. But I can't ask an animal not to react. It is its dharma. It is its law of being to react. But our higher consciousness, individual consciousness, has developed to such an extent that we can change, we can regulate. But the national consciousness, the group consciousness has not yet come to that point where it will be honest to practice this law. So when leaders or saints, or pacifists and all that, they impose, they say, ask the countries, the governments to do this, it is not fair. They have not developed to that level of consciousness. We have yet to develop collectively. Yeah. No.
Yeah, they both stopped. This one's still running.
45 minutes, I think it is almost.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of developing that ahimsa or
Yeah.
conservation? Because it seems, when you just read it, or think about it, it sounds like a repressive, which isn't really getting rid of it, it's holding it in.
Yes, it is a good point. In this discipline, we have to practice rejection and not suppression. All things that are inimical to our inner growth, they are to be rejected. We do not have to suppress them inside yourself, so they go and deposit themselves in your subconscious and create imbalances. We should honestly feel this is not, I don't want it, not this is to be controlled. But in the beginning, all rejection starts with suppression. In the beginning. But gradually, after you refuse to give expression to that impulse, refuse to harbor that impulse for some times, the force of that impulsion gets less and less. And thereafter you just reject it, as you reject physical uncleanness, physical noise, things like that. But you have to learn to reject and not to repress. Rejection is keeping it out. Repression is suppressing it within yourself. So, for instance, occasions for anger. When they come, if you refuse to express that anger, inwardly you see it in the beginnings, you feel that surge of violence, surge of anger. But you should just refuse to express it, you put it in action. Thereafter, that movement gets slowed down, less strong.
In relation to that, I'd like you to comment on what seems to be, I've only been back in this country a year, but a lot of people here probably know a lot more about it. The movement of working through things, of being honest about your feelings and expressing them, which a lot of human potential movements now seem to be into. And their whole shtick is that if you don't express it, it's going to cause more trouble later, and what you should do is get it out where everybody can see it.
Yes,
Yeah, let it go.
this is a philosophy that has been catching in India also, and it has done incalculable harm, because it is this movement of expressing whatever comes is legitimate and natural at a subhuman level. As human consciousness develops, there is a discrimination that this is right and this is not right, this is not good, this is not favorable for my development, this is not favorable for others' development. And culture, civilization, religion, all these are ways of learning to keep out things which are harmful. When they come up, we remember, we have a social conscience, we have an individual conscience, we say no. So we are in the process of eliminating it from our system by refusing to give expression to it. If we start giving expression to it, there is no end. You go back to the level of the animal and start expressing whatever you do. There is a philosopher in India, called a philosopher, who says, when there is anger, be angry. When there is sex, become sexual. And that way. And he is drawing large number of crowds simply because certain things which should be inhibited, kept out, are given free indulgence. That's not the way of evolution. The way of evolution is to go higher than the human stage. And there is not this problem of giving expression to animal tendencies, subhuman tendencies. You have to control, master, and make them irrelevant. That's the way of evolution. This is a way of regression. So there are people from America in our country also, it's the EST, and they're all there, but these are pernicious philosophies which don't answer to the true nature of man.
If you have that impulse or that feeling and you do not give it an expression, you still have to examine it, do you not? And have to face it within yourself, or otherwise are you not just repressing it? If you just say, I won't show my anger, but you feel it in there, you're going to have to face up to it and accept the fact that you have that feeling and do something about transmuting it or doing something so that you are not just repressing it, which...
In the beginning, it is enough to have the knowledge that it is wrong, and you refuse to give expression to it. That's the first step. The second step is to have a counter quality, a counter movement. You forgive. Where there is anger, you learn to inwardly forgive that person. You must understand why he is doing like that, instead of judging him and getting angry. That's the next step. But first step is to refuse to give expression. The next step is to analyze and see why the situation has arisen. And when that is done, we develop the habit of not becoming angry, but of trying to understand people. That makes us a force for collective harmony and a growth in peace. We are always in a hurry to judge people, react to people. This is wrong. But anger, it does not improve the situation. If I become angry and say something, in the other person there is always an impulse for self-justification. He justifies himself. Now if I don't, there is a chance of that person's realizing. She didn't say anything, he didn't say anything. And something inside asserts itself, and I should not have done it. They may be too proud or egoistic to express that, but it does influence their way. In this Patanjali's system, it is yoga aphorisms. It is said, Pratipaksha Bhavanam, that is, cultivation of the opposite qualities. Instead of always being busy with those negative things, promote the positive contraries. If I tend to be normally mean, stingy, well, I should cultivate the habit of becoming generous, broad, and that replaces it.
I'd put it in an impersonal way. I'd say they're the masters and the divine plan. And on the other hand, there is anger and hate and a great deal of fear and mistrust in the world. And that is the equivalent of pollution in the air. And you're either on the side of the masters and not simply failing to react, but as he said, counteracting by sending love into the air to offset the pollution. Not in a personal way of being this other man, but in a universal way of filling the atmosphere with the vibrations of them.
That's true. The psychological pollution in the world is 100 times more than the physical pollution.
My conflict is between, on the one hand, wanting to joy in what's around me, and on the other hand, being more ascetic. I call that like going to a cave in India, to withdraw. And I seem to be going back and forth between that, and I don't know where growth is from that.
This is an age-old conflict, based upon a confusion of understanding of both the ends of life. To go ascetic, to refuse to participate in life, withdraw to the mountains, retreats, is a way of escape. You don't solve any problem. The external problem may be kept out, but psychologically you carry your problem wherever you go. Life is a challenge. Life is a field for manifestation, for evolution. We are there as products of evolution on the way to higher evolution, and that has to be done in the midst of life. If today life is a depressing field where there is nothing except disappointment, frustration, misery and pain, it is because we have lost the art of living. We do not know how to live. We are always living on the surface, on our ego desire level, making ourselves the center of the universe, expecting everybody in the universe to serve our interest directly or indirectly. Anything that happens, we judge from how it affects us, not in its own rightness or wrongness. This wrong poise, wrong stationing of oneself in a small, enclosure, walls of ego, walls of self-interest, that robs you of the joy of life. An individual is fronting the universal impact of life force, and we shrink. The way out is to stay where you are, but change your center of reference, change your standpoint from the ego, discard the ego and go backwards. There is the truer soul, there is the truer self, where you feel a certain oneness and a unity with life around, and the bliss of life, the joy of life yields itself to one who can embrace life in its totality. We have in the oldest Upanishads, Isha Upanishad, it is said, all this world, all this is for habitation by the Lord. All in this universe within universe, that is an individual universe, in the universe, cosmic universe, all is for habitation by the Lord. Do not steal what belongs to another. Do not appropriate to yourself what belongs to the cosmic spirit. Renounce and enjoy. You can truly enjoy only when you renounce your sense of proprietorship, when your sense of appropriation. This is for everybody. This is a beautiful nature, beautiful garden. If I put a fence around it and say only I shall enjoy it, I will always be bothered to keep out other people, always wondering whether I am going to lose, some thieves will come, sabotage will take place. Instead of that, if I keep the thing open, man has to evolve further. If he keeps limited to his individual self, he misses the joy of life. So, a total spirituality demands that you stay in the midst of life, change your approach, change your standpoint, and then the whole picture will change.
I have very much joy in life, and my fear is that I might get lost in it. And what I hear you saying, if I do that, then I'm doing what I would want.
As long as there is the inner sensitivity and opening, one can never get lost. One always knows this joy comes from nature, this joy comes from others. One is always grateful. You see, one joins in the stream of life and adds higher vibrations to it instead of, exploiting it. There is a joy in allowing oneself to be exploited. The joy of giving is more than the joy of taking. And love, the true nature of love is self-giving. What we humans call love is a calculated transaction. I give this thing, emotion, sentiment, you have to return. If you don't, there is a resentment. Love is not that. Love is self-giving. The whole creation is an act of love of God. He gives himself. And each one of us has to repeat that cosmic miracle by giving oneself. The more you give yourself, the more you grow. And the larger your being grows. That's the art of life. Nature starts, with the law of sacrifice. No life can live without interchange with other lives. There has to be self-giving. But at a subhuman stage, it is a forced living, forced giving. The plants give and other things give, but not out of voluntary thing. They are forced to give by natural compulsion. So this interchange of life between lives is compelled under compulsion. But when man appears, he is given a certain freedom. So he fights between the law of giving and the law of taking. Primitive people always take things, force people to give. As we evolve, as we get civilized, we say no, it is a good part to give to the society, to the family, to others. Of course, a lot of self-interest is involved in giving also. But still there is a growth. And the higher growth is to give without asking for return. That is love. War is the father of man, they said, yes, but at a certain stage. After that, that stage is overpassed. You come into the stage of interchange. And thereafter love, which is only giving. Physical immortality. It does not mean an endless living in the same body. It means arriving at an immortal consciousness. Today, our consciousness is broken at the end of the body. Next time we have another body, we don't remember anything, there is a gap. But there is a way of developing a continuity of consciousness by learning to be more and more conscious, even in sleep, even in dream, carrying the thread of consciousness from the last night till this morning, and developing this continuity that even after the body is shed, you still remember. And when this sense of immortality of consciousness is recovered by us, it is communicated to the cells in the body. There is a process by which you change the law of death, which is blindly accepted by physical cells of the human being. Today, by collective suggestion, by habit, by legacy, everybody's body accepts the cycle of birth, growth, decay, death. But it is possible that the growth can be kept continuous. When this immortality of consciousness is communicated to this body and body is worked upon, constant suggestions, constant change of habits, the body will not die. That is, no disease, no disintegration can set in. But you are free to change your body, discard your body whenever you choose. There is no fun in living like an Egyptian mummy for thousands of years in a body. And one can choose, discard, have a new body of different type. But the continuity of consciousness is maintained. This has been a dream of seers, psychics, and they have been trying to do this, some with herbs, some alchemy, metals, mercury, some by physical, hatha yoga and things like that. Now in California they are trying by jogging, running and awakening new states of consciousness. Now I suppose all these can be contributive to an ultimate solution. But still we have not yet learnt the art, the secret of that. Man is fumbling for it. Nature has kept it still secret. But we have to go on trying.
Do you think that we die physical death just because we believe that we die?
Ultimately it is that. There is at a certain level acceptance of death. Even when you don't individually believe, there is a collective suggestion. Collective suggestion. And that collective suggestion has to be countered by developing an individual consciousness which exceeds the collective consciousness and opposes that falsehood. Mother was my teacher, she used to call this falsehood death is a falsehood of the body. When the body does not need to die. Why does the body die? It is because the soul inside the body is an encasement, a vehicle for the growth of the soul. Now, when there is a gap between the progress of the body and the progress of the soul, there is disease, there is sickness. And when the gap becomes too much, the body dies. The soul discards the body. So the way is to develop an integrated progress. The body, the mind, the life energies, the soul. All these must be integrated, harmonized. And the progress of each must be communicated to the others. So all should share in a progress. And that way, the habit of gulf between one member and another of the human being can be healed. But for that we have first to accept that scheme. That the body is not something to be rejected and thrown. This physical world is not evil. We have made things evil. The ego of man, it is which has done. And it is the ego that has to be crucified. Ultimately, from individual point of view, that's the truth. It is the ego that has to be crucified. One has to die in one's ego. And then only the true being comes forward, and that is resurrection. The true birth of man, the true soul can come only when the ego is dead. The death of the ego. That is important.
Pandit, how does the ego form in the first place?
Yes. In this universe, all is a flux of forces. Clash of forces, flux of forces. So, nature develops a point of convergence, a point of concentration from the beginning. In each form slowly it develops so that all the clash and all the flow can be centralized at some level, and the form continues from that point. And when it reaches the human stage, it is called the ego. Ego is a necessity till this concentration and convergence becomes an actual fact, and a continuity of a form is there, conscious continuity. So I say I, whatever interests me, the others are I. So this sense of I gives me a certain interest in life, a control over life, a direction over life. So nature develops this centralizing point called the ego point in each form. But once it is well developed and I become conscious of it, thereafter I have to discard it as a scaffolding and allow the true center, the soul, the self, to come forward. Ego was the helper, ego is the bar. The true soul takes its place, the inner being. It can't take its place now because the ego is a cover. The less the ego functions, the more the influence of the soul or the true being inside operates.
It's just hard to, maybe I'm just impatient, but it's hard to.
We mistake, most of us mistake individuality for ego.
Would you comment on that?
Individuality is the sense of being a person, not being just, tossed about. I have a mind, I have a truth to work out, and I am an individual. But my individuality is not in the ego. It is a false front. It keeps me limited. It keeps me divided from others. But once I go plunge inwards, I find that the ego was a false front. And here I am true. My individuality is more perfect, more effective, more honorable than the ego personality. That's the true personality. And that is based on the soul. The soul holds together the mental personality, the emotional personality, the physical personality and the vital personality together from behind. And it goes on not only drawing experience through all these personalities, but it also infuses its own peace, its own strength to the extent we are open to it. Think.
A focal point for the consciousness, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. Nature has developed it as a focus. But once it is in the surface focus, inside there is a stronger and a more permanent focus. In 15 minutes are left. I think we could go into meditation. What we had in the morning encourages me very much. And there are 2 or 3 ways. Let us start with one. That is, in the heart of each one of us, there is a divine presence. Whether we believe in it or not, there is a divine self, a direct portion of divine consciousness, a point of light. Now this innermost presence reveals itself differently to different people. Some may visualize it as a tiny light, a flame. Some as a bliss. Some as solid peace. Some as something present, warm presence, but no form. And some may see it in the form of a figure which they worship and adore, and some as miniature forms of themselves. That's ultimately the soul. So when we enter into a meditation upon that truth in ourselves, use meditation as a technique, as a process to withdraw from surface preoccupations and go inward, searching for our own truth, that truth which is immortal, unchanging, eternal, which is in us. We have first to mentally have that image that deep inside of us there is the source of light, there is the source of truth, there is the divine. And we must try to go step by step. You can have the image of a cave, which is mentioned in many mystic scriptures, a cave which becomes narrower and narrower as it goes deeper, leading to that sanctum sanctorum. Or you may have the figure of a well in which you are going down and down and down. Whether it is inside, in a cave or in a well, try breathe using your breath as a thread. Make your breathing a little slow and follow the breathing. At a stage you will find, you will wonder if you are breathing at all. You may be overcome by a fear that you may die. But that is a false fear, the fear of the physical ego, that you are going out of its clutches. Don't be afraid. Let yourself be sucked in. There is a magnetic pull deep down in you, pulling you inside to the place where you should be. So let us utilize these 10 or 15 minutes to this inward plunge, using the breath as a rope. As a theme, before you leave this session, and they are in moments when the inner lamps are lit and life's cherished guests are left outside, there are parts in us which grow towards light. Right?
It's impossible. The spirit is extends in space.
Uh-huh. I think so. But this is the main idea. So, whatever thoughts may come, whatever ideas and things may clash in our minds, something in us grows, something moves towards the light. So we'll meet again at 2:30. 2 o'clock. 2 to 3:30, and then a half an hour break and 4 o'clock music.
Yeah.